Hello everyone, I'm so excited. VueConf is finally here. Is everyone excited? Yeah, there's so many great presentations coming up. So thank you all for coming to mine on custom component libraries with Vue and Tailwind. My name is Paige Kelly. I'm a senior software developer at Package.json. We're out in Denver, Colorado. I actually have a few of my coworkers here in the audience today. So hey guys. All right. So at Package.json where I work, we have this tradition that I really like. And it's when you join the team or meet a group of people for the first time, you give a weird fact about yourself. So I figured since I'm meeting most of you for the first time, I would give a weird or interesting fact about myself. So my weird fact for you all today is I've actually lived at 24 different addresses since I was born. I know that's a lot. I had to call my mom up the other day and be like, have her help me count some of the ones from when I was a kid. But a lot of those addresses were actually right here in South Florida. So in honor of my old home state and where we're going to be spending the next few days, I figured we could build a Florida-themed custom component library using Vue and Tailwind. So let's jump into that. All right. So before we can start building our component library, I need to answer a few questions from one of my friends, who's a seagull because I'm from Florida. All right, so he's asking, what are component libraries and why do we use them? So a component library is really similar to what it sounds like. It is a collection of pre-built components like drop-downs, selects, buttons, and modals. So I'm guessing a lot of us here are software developers since we're at VueConf, and you probably have worked with component libraries before. You might even have a few of your own favorites. So let's ask the next seagull what some of his favorites are. It says Bootstrap, Aruga, and of course, Beautify. All right, so now we know what a component library is and a few examples of them. Let's jump into building our own. So our first step is really similar to how you'd build any Vue application. And for me, I chose to use the Vue CLI. If you're unfamiliar with it, there is a link to the documentation on the bottom right-hand corner of this screen. So let's jump into that. First, we're going to run Vue create and the name of our component library, which is going to be Florida components. When you run this command, the CLI is going to give you a list of different features to choose from. These are the ones that I chose for this project. So if you're following along, here they are. All right, so once you run that command, you'll see a folder has popped up with the name of your component library, Florida components. So I CD'd into that, ran an npm run serve. And when you run serve, you will notice that the boilerplate Vue CLI application has popped up on your local host. So it should look something like that. All right, so we have our application all up and running. Our next step is we're going to install Tailwind CSS. So before we install Tailwind, I need to let everybody know it is not a requirement for building a component library. I've just been working with Tailwind a lot lately in some of my projects, and I've really loved it. So I thought I would throw it into this presentation to show everybody. So what Tailwind is a utility-based CSS framework. And what that means is you use utility classes right inside of your template. And we'll look at what that looks like a little later. Some reasons for using Tailwind is it gives quick styling. So when you put those utility classes right in your template, you can code it out and design it really quickly. Another reason is design system integration. So a design system is something that your UX team would give you, like a list of parameters, different like styles to follow. And Tailwind's easy to extend and theme and really make it your own. So it really encapsulates that design system. And last, one of my personal favorite features of Tailwind is it supports dark mode styling. So it's really easy to style your components for light and dark mode. And we'll look at that a little later in this presentation. So here are our 5 steps. Let's get started. All right. So our first step is going to be to install Tailwind and its dependencies. Before we do this, I also need to let you all know there's multiple ways to install Tailwind. I went the post-CSS route. If you want to look into some of the different ways to install it, there is a link to the documentation at the bottom right-hand corner of this screen. All right, so the install. We're going to run an npm install on Tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer. When I ran this command, these are the versions of those packages that I got. All right, our next step is we're going to create our Tailwind CSS file and add in our directives. So in your source folder, you're going to add a file called Tailwind CSS, and in there you're going to copy in these 3 lines of code. These are your Tailwind directives. So let's look at what each one of these things is doing. So first we have our base. This includes something called preflight, and what preflight's going to do is really cool. It's going to normalize your CSS cross-browser. So this is going to make your applications look similar whether you open it up in Firefox, Chrome, Safari. I haven't tried it in Internet Explorer, so I don't know. All right. The next one is components. So this is where you're going to keep all of your component classes and add-ons. Last, utilities. So this is going to be the bulk of what we're going to be using in here. These are all of our utility classes, so like our border radius, our background color, our text color. And we're going to look at what it looks like to extend one of these a little later in the presentation. All right, so now that we've built that, we need to import it to main so we could globally access it. So since we used the Tailwind CLI, we're going to have this main.js file. It should look really similar to this. We're just going to add in this 1 line of code here. So we import our Tailwind CSS file. Next, we're going to generate our configuration file. So we're going to run this npx command, npx tailwind css init-p. And what that's going to do is it's going to generate 2 files for us. One is our Tailwind config file. Another one is our post-CSS config file. All right, so now that we've done that, we can open up our Tailwind config and configure our template file. So this is pretty cool too. Tailwind works by scanning all of your files to see what Tailwind classes are being used, and then it only generates the classes that you're actually using. So the way we do this is we add in this content and point it to the files that are going to be using Tailwind in them. So here is what we're doing. All right, so now we have our application up and running. We have Tailwind installed. It's time for step 3, which is to build our first component. And this seagull says, let's build a button. So that's what we're going to do. All right, the first thing we need to do is set up our file structure. So we're going to open up our code. And in it, you should see this components folder. Since we use the Vue CLI, you're going to find a file in there called helloworld.vue. You're going to just delete that file and all references to it in your app.vue. Then you're going to replace it with a button folder. So in this folder, we're going to have 2 files. One file is our actual component file, and the next is an index file to export that component. So right now, this file structure looks a little silly, and that's because we only have one component in there and we don't have anything else. But I really liked this file structure that I'm showing you all because I could keep my tests in there. I like using Storybook. I keep my storybooks in these files. I might have multiple buttons. This is just a really good way to keep everything all organized, so I've enjoyed it. Next, another index file that's not doing too much right now, but it's exporting all of our components. Again, a little silly with just one component in it, but trust me, this file gets big as you build out your component library. So that's our file structure. Now we can jump into actually designing our component and using Tailwind. So for anyone who hasn't used Tailwind before, this might look a little different than the template that you're used to seeing in Vue. And that's because with the utility classes, we use them right in the template. So let's jump in and look at what this is actually doing. So these first 4 lines of code you see, we're already having our button look pretty good with these utility classes. I just gave it a little bit of padding, border radius, background color, and text color. It's really simple using Tailwind. Next, we have one of our pseudo classes that we're using with Tailwind. All I have to do is add hover : and then I can override styles right here. Pretty easy. And then we have our active pseudo class as well. So now you can see our button. When you mouse over it or hover on it, it looks like it's kind of popping up with a bit of a drop shadow, lighter color. You hold down on it for the active class and it kind of darkens up, and all with just a few lines of code. Next, so I think this part's kind of exciting. This is what I was telling you all about earlier. This is the dark mode. So same component and styled for dark mode. All we have to do is add dark : in front of whatever we want to override. So we could even override some of those pseudo classes with this. So now as you see, we have our button styled for light and dark mode. This last little chunk down here is transitions. I just wanted to throw in and show you all how easy it is to add transitions and animations using Tailwind. So now when you hover over your button or click down on it, you'll see a little bit of motion when all of those styles are being added and taken away. All right, so last one is our dynamic class that we're passing in. So this is just showing you how like you could use your props to like really make these components your own. So here I'm adding in a full width prop. So now we have the button supports expanded. So when it's in a container, if the dev user passes in a prop expanded of true, it'll take up the full width of the container. And you could do this with all kinds of things. It's pretty cool. Our slot, so this makes it so you could write whatever you want inside of your button. You could even add icons. I chose to use Hello World or Hello View Conf, but you could write anything you want. So this really makes the button reusable. And now here's another seagull coming to press our button. All right, so now let's extend our base styles. So we're back in that Tailwind CSS class or file that we set up earlier. Here we're going to extend our base. So I am adding styles to our body class here, and this is just going to give it a white background, dark gray text, and then when we're in dark mode, it's going to flip that over. The background will be dark gray, and the text will be white on there. The next thing I added in here was our H tag, and I just kind of wanted to show you like how we could really bring in our typography and all of our styles from that design system with our component library. I think this is pretty cool as well. And we'll look at what this is doing a little later in the presentation. Step 4, we're going to register our components. All right, so we are going to create another index file. This one's going to be at the root of our source folder. And let's look at what that looks like. So this is our entry file. We're going to import in all of our components from that component index file that we put into the root of our components folder earlier. Then we're going to iterate over each component and register an instance of view on it. Then export it as Florida components. So this is what you're going to be able to install globally on your consuming application. All right, next step, we're going to configure our package.json. So our package manager will be able to publish it, and our scripts, so we'll be able to build it out for the package manager. So let's go over what each one of these things is doing. First, we have our name. So this is what our package manager is going to name our component library. Since mine's a Florida component library, I named it Florida Components. Version, we haven't published yet, so it's version 1.0. Every time you publish to your package manager, you're going to need to update this one. All right, so next, let's look at our main and our module. So this is our entry files. For our main, we're going to use a common.js file, and for our module, we're using a UMD, or Universal Module Definition file. These files are going to be generated by our build script below. All right, so next step, we have our author and our description. So author, me, Paige Kelly. And then description, this is kind of like our README for GitHub, but it's for NPM. So this is just telling the user how to use your package. I just kind of left in the default text here. Next, we have files. So this is telling our package manager which files to publish. So I'm building everything out into my dist folder, so I'm telling it to publish my dist. Next, private, I had to toggle this over to false because we're publishing this publicly. All right, so those are all of our settings. Let's look at our scripts. So serve, we've already used this one. That was our npm run serve. Next is our build. Build is a compilation of the next two scripts. And this is just so you don't have to run each one of your scripts manually. Right now I only have 2, but this does both of them. So first one, let's look at, this is our build lib. So this is going to create those entry files that main and module are pointing to. But let's break down what this is doing. So first we have the Vue CLI service build with a target of library. You could either target this as a web component or a library. Since we're building a component library, I chose library for that. Next is name. This is what we're going to be naming our entry files. Notice the Florida components is being highlighted above because these things need to have the same name because we're generating those files here. Last, we are pointing to our entry file. That's the thing that we configured in the last step, and we're telling it to build out this file. All right, so there is our build library script. Next, we have our build style. So since we're using Post.css, we're telling Post.css to compile Tailwind CSS and output it as styles.css in our dist folder. So all of this will make a lot more sense and be a lot more useful in our next step. Step number 6, which is to publish to NPM. Let's get published. All right, so we're going to run that build script. So that was the script that we set up in the last step that runs our build library and our build styles. So I'm going to run npm run build. And when I run that, a dist folder will appear in my code, and it should be populated with a few things. The first set of things is going to be all those entry files that are generated by our build library. Next is going to be our styles.css file that was built by the build styles script. All right, so now we have all of the files that we need to publish to NPM. Let's go ahead and publish. Before you run the next script, npm publish, you're going to need to go into npm, create an account, and then log into it through your terminal. So assuming you've done all of those things, we're going to run npm publish. And if you've successfully published your component library, the name of it, along with the version, will be printed out below. All right. And also, you'll be able to go onto NPM and see your component library. So now we have a component library all up and published. Let's see this thing in action. All right. So here you can see I built a basic application using the CLI. There's not a lot here. We just have an H tag on, or an H1 tag on welcome to Florida. And then some body text that says, this is a Florida bird, and a picture of our friend the seagull who's been helping us through this presentation. All right. So now let's install our component library. So run npm I. So we're going to run an install on our component library, Florida components, and here it goes, getting installed. All right, there it is, version 1, and then let's run this again. All right, so you'll see nothing's really changing yet. We're going to need to set this up in our application. So the way that we consume our package library is we're going to open up our main.js file. So this is the application that's up and running on my local host right now. We are going to import our Florida components. And then we're also going to import in that styles.css file that we generated. I'm going to save this. So now we should have global access to all of our components and our styles that we're importing in from the component library. Let's see what happens when we use one of these components. So now I am using my Florida button. It's called FL-button, and that's because we were exporting it as camel case Florida button, FL button. I've added one method on here, so when you click the button, it should order a public sub for the seagull as a thank you from me for helping me through my presentation. All right, so let's save this. And I'm coding. This is fun. Why? Line 3. Okay. Oh my god, I've done this like a million times, and this is literally the only time that this... Oh my god, I forgot to use. Okay, this is why this was screenshot. I have never live coded in front of people before. Never doing it again. All right, so I'm going to add in my view use so we could globally use the component library. It's like I've done this so many times, so isn't this one working? All right, now you can see our button component is up there. We have our typography. Thank you. Oh my god, I knew that was going to happen too. I was like, if I write anything live, it's not going to work. And now let's click the button, order the seagull a sandwich, and it's all up and working. Now let's look at this in dark mode. All right, so we're going to go into our system preferences, go back, into general, if you're on a Mac, toggle this over to dark mode. Super cool. Our application is now supporting dark mode because of our component library. We have our button in dark mode. We buy a sandwich for the seagull in dark mode as well. So that is our component library in action. Let's go back to the slides, Play from current slide. All right. Nice working. All right. All right, so we have a few other things to consider. First one is testing. We all just listened to that presentation by Beth, so we're all professionals on testing our components now. If not, I think there's a few other presentations on there. Cypress is a great thing to test with. Next, we have accessibility. So since we are building all of our components from scratch and not using a pre-built component library, you're going to need to think about accessibility. So there are other presentations today on accessibility if you're not too familiar with it. I highly recommend checking those out. I will be there because I still need to learn a lot more about this personally. And lastly, documentation. We just built all these really cool components. We need to tell people how to use them. So documentation, there's ViewPress. I like using Storybook. There's a million ways to document your components. All right, so last thing is have fun building. You can follow me at Paige C. Kelly on Twitter. If you'd like to look at any of the code that we just built, it's up on GitHub. And if you want to install that super fun button, there is our NPM package. All right, any questions? Thank you, guys.
Amazing stuff, Paige. Anyone got any questions? Oh my God. You were fast.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is David, and I just have a question. What are your thoughts on using scope styling?
Scope. That's a good one. I haven't thought about that. I am not too sure, actually. I can't give you a confident answer on that. I use scope styling in my applications normally, so I'm a pretty big fan of them, keeping everything contained, but I haven't really thought about that as a component library because I'm using the Tailwind stylings, and then all of my other styles I'm not really using in the component templates themselves. I'm using them more in the global component library stylings, like inside of the base and the component add-ons, because I think that's more of the pattern that they want you to follow with Tailwind.
Yeah, it's our first time ever on a stage, and you hit her with the hard questions.
I know,
seriously?
thanks. All right.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we've had in using Tailwind for component libraries is that it can lead to duplicate declarations, that you have your compiled CSS inside the component library that's built separately, and then you have your also Tailwind being used in the main application that's the consumer of those libraries. Have you found a strategy for being able to avoid that sort of duplicate CSS?
I haven't really run into that yet, to be honest. So no.
Yeah, guys, seriously. But that's the best answer. Yeah, you know what? I don't know, but we'll find it out. So.
I'm also pretty new to Tailwind, to be honest. I've only been using it in my last couple projects. So I haven't really run into too many problems with it yet.
Also, for a first-time speaker ever, oh my God, you did an amazing job. And you live coded. What the hell?
One line.
Also, I just have one question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you don't mind. This is an easy one.
Okay.
When is your birthday?
Oh, no. It might be today.
It might be today. We're all going to sing happy birthday to her. Are you ready?
No.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Paige. Happy birthday to you.
Thanks
Thanks very much, Paige. Well done.
Bye.